Hello and welcome to the Little Historians Magazine TV. Today we've got some fast facts for you all about crime and punishment through time. Now when we think about crime and punishment, there's three different types of crime to keep in mind. Crime against a person, which was inflicting harm to someone. Crime against property, like stealing or theft. And crimes against authority, like treason against the king or the government.
Pirates like Black Bart had loads of rules on their ships. There was no fighting between crewmates, no gambling games, and you must go to bed by 8 p.m. And if you broke any of these rules, you'd be marooned on a desert island with nothing but a gun.
In Tudor England, executioners were pretty busy, especially under King Henry VIII, who executed a lot of people. But they didn't just chop people's heads off, they would boil people in oil, cut off their limbs, or cut out their stomach and lungs.
In Anglo-Saxon times, it was the responsibility of the whole community to enforce the law. Men were split into groups of 10 men called tithings, and they would have to make sure that everyone behaved. And then, the tithings were put into bigger groups of 100 men. They would then report back to the shiree, the king's man for the shire, who would report that everyone was behaving.
Wearing purple in ancient Rome was against the law unless you were really rich, but only the emperor was allowed to be fully dressed in purple.
In 1829, Sir Robert Peel introduced the first police, the Metropolitan Police Force of London. The police constables were known as bobbies or peelers because of his name.
Before the Victorian era, there wasn't really a difference between how adults and children were punished for crimes. And the Victorians started to be a bit more thoughtful about why crimes were committed, and they realised that throwing children in a prison with adults who weren't leading the best life wasn't going to help children to grow up to be better people. So in 1854, reformatory schools were started for those under 16 to be sent to if they committed a crime. Regardless, children and adults were both still punished severely for their crimes, just slightly differently.
Blackbeard was a renowned pirate, and he was so feared he could take over merchant ships and command 30 vessels. Of course, being a pirate could send you to the gallows, but Blackbeard, whose real name was Edward Teach, was actually killed by being shot 5 times by pirate hunters, who then hung his head on the end of their mast.
In the 1600s, a woman accused of being a witch could face lots of different punishments. But to decide whether she was actually guilty, there was lots of different methods too. One of which was called the ducking stool, where the witch was either tied with rope or put on a stool and thrown into water. If she floated, she was guilty of being a witch and taken off to be executed. But if she sank, she wasn't guilty, so she wasn't a witch, but she would have been dead either way.
From 1800 to 1840, crime rates went up by about 5,000 criminals per year. People thought punishments needed to be a lot tougher. A lot of convicts were sent over to America, Australia, or Tasmania. But most offences actually carried the death penalty. But these punishments were started to be doubted by courts, and more prisons were being built. Harsh labour became the more common punishment for less serious crime.
From the Tudor to the early Victorian era, highwaymen were common criminals who would attack people while travelling. They would ride up on their horses to coaches that had little defences and steal expensive things like jewellery. They would work alone or in gangs, and if you were caught as a highwayman, your punishment would be execution by hanging.
One of the most famous highwaymen was Dick Turpin, but he was dangerous, scary and cruel, and he robbed innocent people. But he became famous, firstly down to literature. There was an 1834 novel called Rockwood, which romanticised the highwayman.
In 1731, a gang of orphan boys became thieves to survive living on the streets of London, just like Oliver Twist. And 11-year-old Thomas Coleman was caught, and when he was in court on trial, he gave up the names of the rest of the gang, so they were all transported for life because of their petty thefts.
In 1912, Emmeline Pankhurst was put on trial for encouraging others to commit criminal acts. She was one of the leaders of the suffragette party who were campaigning for women to get the vote. So she may have been encouraging others to commit criminal acts, but it was for a worthy cause.
In 1725, Jonathan Wild was put on trial for stealing and receiving stolen goods. He was the thief-taker general, which meant it was his job to catch the criminals, to catch the thieves. But it turned out that he was actually in charge of them and controlling the criminals all along. So he would organise the crime and then go in and solve it.
William Wallace was executed in 1305 as one of the leaders of the First Scottish Wars of Independence. He was executed for treason for fighting against King Edward I.
Jack Sheppard was a celebrity in Georgian England who escaped prison 4 times before finally being executed. But when he was, people paid to go and see it and even bought his autobiography.
If you've enjoyed this fast fact video, then make sure to check out all the other videos on our page about crime and punishment, and get your grown-up to head over to thelittlehistoriansmagazine.com to read all about crime and punishment in our latest magazine edition. If you want to keep up to date with our videos, then make sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time!